What are the limits of scientific thought? How does evolution occur in nature? What does evolution of higher consciousness mean? This is the Laboratory of Mind, a podcast studying that which is closest to us. Welcome to this Laboratory of Mind podcast. I have a guest here tonight, Pablo Sender, who is a doctor in biosciences and also a long-time practitioner of Theosophy. Hello and welcome, Pablo.
Hi, Ari-Pekka. Thank you for inviting me, and welcome everyone who is listening to us.
Yeah, so we met last summer here in Finland, and we were discussing about this consciousness and different perspectives on that. And I was thinking that it would be very interesting to have a dialogue with you around these topics. But first, can you introduce yourself a little bit for the audience, that who you are and what have brought you to these topics?
All right. I'm originally from Argentina, but I'm living in the United States, in California. I was always interested in science and philosophy. When I decided on my college career, I decided to study science because I figured that I could study philosophy on my own, but science, of course, you need a lab and all that. So I started a career on microbiology, and then I came into contact with the Theosophical Society. And in the Theosophical Society, there is this idea of doing comparative studies between science, philosophy, and religion, which was very appealing to me because that's what I was interested in. So when I was in college, I joined the society too. And then I finished my studies as a microbiologist and moved on to do research while doing my PhD in the field of molecular biology. And all this time, I was also very active in the Theosophical Society. And this perspective, as I deepened in it, it seemed more and more interesting and relevant and useful, so that by the end of my PhD, I decided to quit science and to spend most of my time working within the Theosophical Society. So I work in education for the Theosophical Society in America. I moved here in 2007 after having been for a couple of years in the international headquarters of the society, which is in India.
Okay, that's very interesting. One thing I was immediately thinking about is this: is there some connection between this molecular biology and these topics of philosophy that you were interested of?
There is a connection, but is resisted by regular science. Since I was in college, for example, I remember in my final examination in the subject of genetics, it was an oral examination, and I was asked about the theory of evolution of populations. So there is a formula for you to calculate. The idea in science is that there are mutations in the DNA that are random, and that populations evolve by means of these random mutations. And my view always was that these mutations are not random, that they are an expression of some force that is pushing species to evolve, that evolution is not just random. And when I was asked about this subject, I used the equations and to show that, statistically speaking, it's very difficult to explain how evolution can happen just by means of random mutations. So I said, I don't think mutations are random. And the professor there said, well, if, in science, if you are going to propose something, you need to propose a way to verify it. So if you say that there is a force that is guiding evolution, then, you have to find a way to verify that. And he was perfectly right. This is how science works, and the difference between science and religion or spirituality. In any case, for years, science kept rejecting that mutations are anything but random. But lately, there are several papers in which they are discovering that mutations are not random. They see that when they analyze statistically where mutations happen in the DNA, they see that there is a concentration in certain parts of the DNA. Of course, it's very difficult for science to be able to measure what is pushing this evolution, but at least they are seeing that it's hard to explain evolution with just random mutations. So like this, there are many other things. The cell is a very complex organism where just to express one gene, you need so many proteins that come and work in a concerted way, one after the other. And science thinks that proteins are floating around there in the cytoplasm of the cells and just bouncing off blindly. And then that's how they express a gene, because randomly they come, one bounces off, and then the other proper protein bounces off next. And if you do any statistical calculation, it's impossible. Cells respond to the environment very quickly, and it's impossible that this is just random. But the limitations of science is that you can't postulate something else unless you can design some experiments. So this is one of the reasons why I grew tired of science, and I thought, science is great for certain things, but it has heavy limitations when going beyond the physical.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was thinking about this complexity sciences that I have been studying for some time already, and I was thinking about these complex patterns that are emerging in very complex environments, like human organism or whatever other organism, or then this social complex groups that people are also living, that there will be patterns that will have some kind of a predictability and also some variation there. But to say it's just totally random is to kind of neglect these patterns that are forming, and these patterns are quite resistant also to changes that are coming from the outside of these patterns. So there's many very interesting viewpoints that could be built also around this topic of randomness. What is it? What can be randomness in complex environments anyway? What does this term mean?
Yeah, I don't think like the molecular motion in cells is like directed as by a hand, go here or there. I do think that there is a more general, let's say, pressure to for the molecules to move in certain directions, certain currents of perhaps electromagnetic forces or something like that, which makes things happen, if not very precisely as if somebody was moving with their fingers the molecules. This kind of force is increasing the efficiency of all these reactions, etc. And you can see this even at a cosmic level. Again, for science, because science cannot see or measure any force that is beyond the physical, ultimately speaking, when they go to the source of motion, they have to say that it's just random motion. And when they calculate how galaxies are formed, how galaxies move, with the physical forces that science knows about, there is no way to explain the efficiency of galaxy formation, for example. So a big reason why they are introducing this idea of dark energy and dark matter is because they cannot explain how galaxies form in such an efficient and fast way if you can only account on gravity and the motion, etc. So I think this is where science will come to its limitation, that they won't be able to explain the source of the observable. So they will just have to say, okay, there is something here that produces these effects.
Yeah, it can be quite slow, movement in the science to come up with the, next level of explanations for these things. So I was thinking that these were things that you were interested of, and you were kind of frustrated to these limitations in science. So what were the things that were kind of pulling you towards this viewpoint of theosophical philosophy?
Yes. I started science because I wanted to understand how life worked. And it did give me a level of understanding of life on the physical plane, let's say. And but then uh, that to me was only a limited understanding. I wanted something deeper, and then science couldn't provide that. So I felt that, of course, science continues to grow and develop, but I felt that with my scientific career, I had gotten from science all that I could, the general understanding. And then I saw that there was very little room for me to do anything more. There are some people like Rupert Sheldrake, for example. He's a scientist. He was very well regarded in the scientific community. He was part of the Royal Society of Science in England. And he also was a theosophist. He was interested in spirituality. He lived at the Theosophical headquarters for a couple of years. And he's proposing these things like the morphogenic fields that are quite similar to some theosophical concepts. But he's basically rejected in science, mocked by scientists. And so there isn't really, science has become a an organization that is not receptive to inputs that come from outside the system. At the beginning of the 20th century and earlier, you had some amateurs, even Einstein. Einstein was working on a patent office, and he did all these discoveries outside the system, and many other scientists. But then as science became more and more institutionalized and organized, it just listens to those who follow the system within science. And those who bring a different point of view are normally rejected and their careers are truncated. So I realized clearly that, I wouldn't be able to do what I was interested in. And then I also thought that through the Theosophical Society, we we can help more the world than through science. So all these considerations led me to move on.
Yeah. What was specifically interesting in theosophical thinking in your viewpoint?
Mm-hmm. Well, this view that goes beyond the limitations of the physical, I think that was the main, my main interest. There are, especially at the beginning, the theosophical tradition proposes some scientific views of the world. For example, Blavatsky questioned that gravity was a force. She was writing in the 1880s, before relativity, before quantum physics, and she was questioning that gravity was a force. She said, what we see as gravity is actually the effects of other things, not a force in nature. Then Einstein redefined gravity not as a force, but as this, bending of the space-time fabric. And quantum physics, the main problem in quantum physics is that they cannot formulate gravity as a force. They don't find the graviton, this subatomic particle that should be the carrier of gravity. And what is the main obstacle in integrating relativity with quantum physics is gravity. So, and there are many things like that in theosophy, where there is a point of view, even on scientific things, that is, to me, was always quite interesting, and it was telling that these teachings were coming from somewhere that is interesting to explore. So at the beginning, I think that was my main interest, and then little by little, I realized the value of the spiritual teaching itself as a path of self-transformation.
Okay, so at first you were more interested about these things that resonates with the science and the limits of the science, and then it went more towards this spiritual side of self-realization and these kind of things.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was introducing our discussion about this the consciousness, and you have also written this book that draws from the teachings of Blavatsky about the evolution of higher consciousness. And I have reading this book in Finnish. It's korkeamman tietoisuuden evoluutio in Finnish. And as a psychologist, I was also very much interested in this, I think, quite, let's say, scientific way of writing this book that you have. Well, can you tell a little something about this book and what brought you to write this?
Yes. Well, from a practical perspective, those who try to study Blavatsky's writings, Blavatsky was one of the founders of the Theosophical Society, they find that it is difficult to understand her style for several reasons. First, she's writing in a language that is different to the kind of language we use today, almost 150 years later. Also, the topics that she is developing or she's talking about are quite abstruse, abstract, metaphysical. Also, she was trying to generate a language for all of this that was not really available in regular philosophy or psychology. At the time, there was very little knowledge of Eastern traditions, practically no knowledge of Eastern traditions or Eastern spirituality, which was a little closer to what Blavatsky was trying to postulate there. So, in order to understand Blavatsky, I felt that it was necessary first to compile everything she said about the subject, because she used to write a lot on articles. So you find pieces of information. There are 14 volumes of her collected articles. So you have pieces of information all over the place. So I felt that it was necessary to bring everything she said about the subject together, organize it, and then elaborate on the concepts to make it more accessible to the modern student. And then the topic is a topic that I've been always interested in. This is basically about the higher consciousness, meaning that the consciousness that is transpersonal, that is beyond the realm of thought, emotions, and sensations that we know about, and the unfoldment, the development of this higher consciousness, which in religions they may call spiritual consciousness or the soul, or these are vaguer terms. What Blavatsky did is to use very specific terms to talk about all the different aspects of our spiritual nature. So I was invited to give some lectures at the European School of Theosophy, which is a congress that happens every year. And I started gathering material for those lectures, and then later on that evolved in the book.
Yeah. So if we talk about this consciousness and the evolution of this higher consciousness, in the beginning you said that you were very interested of this evolution of population and how these mutations were said to be just random, and you were thinking about that there must be something more organized behind this. So does that have some link to this topic of evolution of higher consciousness that you were also studying from the Blavatsky's articles?
Yes, to some extent. I think the idea in the theosophical tradition is that intelligence or consciousness is a fundamental aspect of the cosmos. Just as matter and energy are part of the cosmos, then we also have, according to the theosophical tradition, consciousness, and they are all expressions of a single principle. So today we know that matter and energy are, we can convert them into each other, that they are two aspects of the same thing. Well, Theosophy says we can go one step further and discover that consciousness is an aspect of energy and matter, or matter and energy are aspects of consciousness, which means that consciousness is everywhere in the cosmos. Not consciousness necessarily as a god, as an anthropomorphic consciousness. Consciousness as this abstract principle of law, order, beauty. Something in the cosmos is pushing, so to say, the whole of the cosmic development into a certain direction. In human beings, that cosmic movement becomes what we call human consciousness. But that same cosmic movement expressing through animals is what we call instinct. And expressing through trees is what we may call the intelligence of the plant to adapt to the environment, to move toward the sun, etc., etc. So there is a connection between this, the evolution in animals, for example, or plants, and the evolution in human beings, in that both are expressions of this, we can call it universal mind. Again, not the mind of one anthropomorphic God, but this universal intelligence. But in human beings, that universal consciousness manifests in individuals, and manifests the sense of I am, I exist, which is not present. This is what we call self-consciousness, which is not present in other kingdoms of nature. I mean, there are some animals who are developing some level of self-consciousness or self-awareness. But so in this book, I am exploring the evolution of that universal mind, but as it manifests through human beings. because our minds are expressions of the universal mind. So they are connected, but the book is focusing specifically on the evolution of this consciousness through human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering this idea of evolution in consciousness is not something that is commonly thought about. I think that the usual way of thinking about consciousness is that it's a kind of a phenomenon like let's say gravity or whatever. So it's just kind of a stable uh, element that doesn't really change. But this one idea here is that there's actually evolution also in the consciousness. So uh, can you tell something about this idea?
Yes, yes. When theosophy postulates that there is consciousness everywhere, even in minerals, Blavatsky always said a consciousness of their own. We are not saying that rocks have thoughts or feelings in the way that we do, or plants. What we are saying is that there is a form of intelligence that is appropriate to the particular organism or structure that is expressing it. And so, what we may call intelligence in a rock, science calls chemistry. But then, for example, you have an atom that has affinity for different elements or other atoms. So a particular atom is able to identify those other atoms that it has affinity with and produce a molecule, and reject other atoms that it doesn't have any affinity. And we call all this chemistry. But in the theosophical view, this is how consciousness manifests at the very simple structure of an atom. And then the same principle that is manifesting as chemistry in the atom, as the organisms evolve and allow a fuller expression of consciousness, that same principle is what we call human intelligence, for example. You can trace, just as you can trace energy from inorganic uh, material to the energy that we use in our bodies, you can trace the same principle at the level of consciousness. So evolution is different for each kingdom of nature, because consciousness is different in each kingdom of nature. And what a kingdom of nature, the experiences, let's say, that a kingdom of nature needs to evolve are different for each of the kingdoms. This is why Blavatsky would many times say this idea that human beings should copy nature. In nature there is the survival of the fittest, and there is all these things that sometimes people say, well, there is aggression in nature, so that aggression is natural in human beings, and there is competition in nature, so there is nothing wrong in competition. HPV would say that that is a mistake, that those forces and things that are helpful in the animal kingdom, for example, are not necessarily helpful in the human kingdom. And the same, they are not necessary. What is helpful in the human kingdom is not necessarily helpful in transhuman kingdoms, celestial beings, for example. So there are laws of evolution for each kingdom because consciousness is different. We have a sense of agency, we have self-awareness that animals, plants don't. Therefore, the rules for human existence are naturally different than the rules for animals. Those who say we should follow nature, well, they should live like animals do if they want to follow nature. If they want to live like humans, there are other, laws that apply to the human nature. So yes, evolution is different because consciousness is different.
Is there also changes in this? I don't know what would be a correct word here, but this element of consciousness, does it change and evolve also in different ways?
Yes, it does. I mean, the idea is that there is an ultimate principle of absolute consciousness, let's call it, which is the potentiality for all the different kinds of consciousnesses that can be manifested in the cosmos. So consciousness and matter and energy, they are all interrelated. They all limit each other. I mean, they are really the same. They are different aspects of the same. So the kind of consciousness, as we were saying, that is able to be expressed in a plant is different, even though they come from the same absolute principle. It's different from the consciousness that can be expressed in an animal. Maybe it's like having white light, and then you have the white light go through a green glass, through a blue grass, and what comes on the other side of the grass, that is the interaction between consciousness and matter. So the white light would be this absolute consciousness, and as it passes through a particular glass, the light is colored by that glass, and you have all these different colors. So similarly, this absolute consciousness goes through the different organisms or structures, and you get different kinds of consciousness. And within each of them, there is a process of evolution, because there is a process of evolution of matter also. It's like as the glass evolves, and changes colors, maybe the glass becomes more and more clear and with a more delicate color. Also, the expression of consciousness, the ray that comes through the glass, will change. So within each kingdom, the organisms and the structures in those organisms keep evolving, and the expression of consciousness also keeps evolving. So how human consciousness was expressed in the cavemen is very different from how human consciousness is expressed in a Buddha or a Jesus or any wise person. You see, they are a spectrum of consciousness, of human consciousness, that evolves. And the theosophical tradition postulates a way of living that can help that consciousness evolve as fast as possible, because the way in which consciousness expresses today produces a lot of suffering and cruelty, etc. So if we can help humanity move forward as fast as possible, then we are reducing suffering.
I was thinking about this. In biology, you think about evolution as something that happens when new generations born, and there will be mutations in the genes and that kind of things. Do you think that this evolution of consciousness is also happening through these generations of people, or can it kind of evolve also during one person's lifetime, or how do you see this?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think the physical evolution is far slower than the evolution of consciousness, especially at this point in evolution. At the beginning, I think we can take as an analogy a baby. During the first years of a baby, there seems to be a very slow process of the consciousness of the baby awakening. But once it gets to a certain stage, then the little child begins to learn and grow in an exponential way. So at the beginning of human evolution, the awakening of consciousness was very slow. But once it gets awakened, then it starts evolving far faster than the physical structures. So today, the idea is that we can grow quite a bit in one particular lifetime. The theosophical tradition postulates the idea of reincarnation, because this to go from the consciousness of a caveman to that of a Buddha is not possible in one single incarnation. So just as we see the evolution of organisms generation after generation, we see a similar evolution of consciousness reincarnation after reincarnation in each individual. and then globally, because humanity is the sum, the sum total of the individuals. But yes, there is the possibility of growing in one single lifetime and evolving within certain limits. And then we have to continue in the next incarnation. The closer we get to the end, the faster will be the growth in any single lifetime, because there is this kind of exponential curve in the evolution of consciousness, as I said.
Um, in theosophical thinking, is there already kind of a known endpoint for this evolution, some perfected stage that is to be achieved, or does it have or is it more kind of you don't have the end goal yet, or how do you see that?
Mhm. Well, there are relative endpoints, let's say. In the theosophical view, there is an infinite evolution, but evolution goes by cycles. So within any given cycle, there is a beginning and an end. It's just like one single lifetime. You have a beginning and an end, and there is a growth of the body, let's say, that reaches its peak at a certain age. But then in another incarnation, there can be further growth. Similarly, with the evolution of consciousness. So the idea is that people like the Buddha represent the peak of evolution as it is possible on this planet. Actually, not, I don't want to get too technical, but there is still one more round of evolution after the the level of consciousness that the Buddha attained. So probably it's a little more than that. But the idea is that within this planet, uh, the 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 peak of evolutionary development that we can reach is more or less what the Buddha was, let's say. Now, after the evolution on this planet is over, then consciousness continues to evolve in further systems, not necessarily as human beings, because that consciousness developed all it could in a human form, but it begins to be part of other kingdoms of nature that we know very little about, which religions loosely talk about angels or devas, or which in the theosophical traditions, they are the forces guiding evolutionary or cosmic evolution, the evolution of different kingdoms of nature. They are all guided by celestial beings, which have a different consciousness to the human beings. They are not just human beings with wings. Their consciousness is very different from that of human beings, just as the consciousness of a plant is very different from humans. So consciousness evolution keeps going on, but there is an end for each cycle that can reach the perfection for that cycle. And we could take
Yeah.
the Buddha allegorically as that
Okay.
perfection.
So it's a kind of a cyclical worldview in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing about this consciousness I was thinking is that is there you were talking about this like atoms and molecules and which is chemistry, but what about the big human groups like nations or the whole global population? In theosophical view, is there consciousness that is kind of emerging in this kind of societies, or is it
Mm-hmm.
more kind of individual, or how do you see it?
Yeah. That's also another good point to bring into, because the idea is that there is both. There is the individual evolution of human beings, but that individuality is it's like a fuzzy individuality, not a very a separate individuality. I mean, if you think everything we do, all our individual actions are being conditioned by the environment, by what we eat, by the weather, by astrological influences, if you believe in that, by the society and culture in which you are born. So even though there are individual actions, those individual actions in a certain way are the expression of the whole. So the same idea is at the level of consciousness. We do have our individual consciousness, but our individual consciousness is a part of a larger organism, like, let's call it, that is the human consciousness as a whole. So we are all affected by the collective human consciousness in several ways that were described in theosophical literature, and we all affect the collective consciousness. So the idea is that there is a collective evolution also, which you can see despite all the difficulties that we see in the world today, and that it seems we are devolving. That's just an impression in our consciousness. If we look at statistics, we can see that in the last, say, 200 years, 300 years, there are today far less wars than before. There is far less hunger than before, far less poverty, far more education, far more equality. There is a collective evolution that is clear if you look at, a time span that is large enough. And of course, there are many things that remained to be solved. We still have many problems, but we are moving in the right direction. And because evolution is not just a straight line that goes little by little up, it's more up and down, but the general movement is going up, to talk graphically. At any point, there are places in which we seem to be going back, but the overall evolution, collective evolution, is happening in humanity. And, individuals are affecting that collective evolution, and the collective evolution is affecting individuals. So part of the service of a spiritual person is that by changing oneself, we are also changing a little the collective consciousness. There is like an ecology of consciousness. In the regular atmosphere, if you pollute the atmosphere, you pollute it everywhere. And if you purify the atmosphere, you purify it for the whole world. So similarly with us, if we transform our consciousness, we are transforming also a little the collective consciousness. And that's where, a kind of service beyond activism, there is a kind of service and help to humanity that we can offer by transforming ourselves.
Yeah, I was thinking that this, these downhills that we are also facing, if you're thinking about the personal growth, it's kind of like when you grow, you will have to also face these things that you have left behind, but perhaps you can solve those a little better and improve in doing this work with this difficult things also. So in order for some things to evolve and improve, I think that it is necessary to also visit these more difficult things and evolve in doing that work also.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Part of the way human evolution grows is by experience both joy and sorrow. Sorrow is an evolutionary force as much as joy. We see that very often people who are able to live in an environment, let's see, very wealthy people, if they generate an environment where there are no sorrows, no challenges, those people normally don't have a healthy mind, a healthy psychology. They are spoiled. They are unable to face life. They are very self-centered. In the story of the Buddha, in the traditional story, there is an astrologer that when the Buddha was born, he was a prince, the son of a king. And the astrologer told the father that this baby was going to be some kind of king, either an earthly king or a spiritual king. So the father, who was interested in his son continuing his kingdom, when he thought about how to prevent the Buddha from becoming an awakened spiritual person, he thought, I
Mm.
have to surround him of pleasure and everything that he can want. I have to take away any sorrow so that he doesn't know sorrow. And that is very insightful, because if we don't know sorrow, we stagnate in our evolution. Sorrow, difficulties are necessary to the right, uh, degree. If we have much more sorrow we can handle, it can also crush the person. So there is a balance that is needed between sorrow and joy. And the difficulties, therefore, are evolutionary forces when we learn how to use them.
Mm. Yeah. So I was thinking about this, the topic of the discussion, this consciousness. I know that in theosophical thinking, it is quite a complicated matter. Like in your book that I showed, there's many levels that you have to kind of grasp, that you have this uh, general idea of what is consciousness. But can we open it up a little bit? What does this mean in theosophy? What is human consciousness?
Mhm. I think we can summarize it on three levels of consciousness, which, from a certain point of view, may be similar to what Freud postulated. Freud postulated that there was something in us, these impulses, what he called the id. Then there
Mm.
was the ego that is trying to handle all of that, and then there is the super ego, that is where the idea of morality comes, etc. And the ego is this structure that is trying to negotiate with the expectations and morality and the more instinctive impulses.
Mm.
That's similar to what Theosophy postulates, which Theosophy postulated that this before Freud was in the picture. But Freud takes the superego in as being just part of, not a spiritual part, but being just a cultural aspect, where we have the expectations that how a human being should behave, etc. In Theosophy, the idea is that there is this aspect in ourselves that we inherit from the natural, from the animal kingdom, which is the source of the the tendencies to aggression, or the tendencies toward pleasure, or the tendencies for self-preservation, and all of these. In the animal kingdom, they manifest in a healthy way, but in the human kingdom, that is not always the case, because we have the mind. So if I get an aggression, normally in the animal kingdom, the aggression happens there at the moment, and then it is forgotten. But because
Mm.
we have a mind, we cling to that, we generate resentment, regret, thirst for revenge, all these things that animals don't experience. So in the human being, this nature that we inherit from the animal is produces a lot of trouble. So that's an aspect of our consciousness. It's an instinctive, biological consciousness that is co-opted by the mind, and generates all these, as I was saying, revenge, etc. That is not experienced in the animal kingdom. And then we have a higher nature, a spiritual nature, that is the source of all the traditional virtues: peace, love, compassion, wisdom, joy, etc. They are all impulses, let's say, that come from our higher nature. And our minds are between these two influences, the influence from the animal or biological nature and the influence from the spiritual nature. And the mind is trying to deal with this. So a lot of the evolution of consciousness is at the level of the mind. For the mind to learn that following the spiritual inspiration is healthier than following the biological impulses. Of course, again, biological impulses are fine when they are not blown out of proportion by the mind. So as the mind begins to follow the spiritual, then the biological goes to its proper place and performs its proper functions. So basically, that's the idea, to take the mind off the identification with selfishness, jealousy, aggression, etc., so that it can identify with the spiritual, and then everything will express itself in a balanced way. So I think I would summarize it in that way.
Okay. Yeah, that's a quite good summary, I think. So how does this happen? This kind of switch from this biological, instinctual acting or reacting towards more kind of a spiritual basis of working of the mind.
Mm-hmm. I think the theosophical tradition is what we could call a kind of Gnostic tradition. Gnostic in the general way, gnosis means knowledge or wisdom. And traditions which are Gnostic are traditions that basically think that wisdom is the way. There are other traditions, even in devotional traditions, like Christianity in most cases, there is a different approach to salvation. They would talk about salvation by faith and by surrender to the divine. And that's a path that is valuable if it is rightly interpreted and rightly applied. The theosophical tradition, although it accepts all paths, it seems to me that emphasizes more the wisdom aspect. So how do we change this identification? I think there is an emphasis on doing it by means of wisdom, which means by beginning to develop an intelligent approach to life and to oneself. First, we need to develop self-awareness, because most people react completely unaware of why they are reacting. And as long as we are unaware, there is very little we can do with that. So there are many people that are reacting to something emotionally, and they may not know that, and they may think that they are acting on some principle. But then when conditions change, they can react in ways that contradict that principle. This is what is happening today a lot in the political world, and where people are accused of hypocrisy. How come you supported this when it was your party, and now when it is the other party you are supporting the opposite? Well, that's because in many cases there was never, the support was never for the principle. It was more the expression of a certain emotional reaction, let's say. So if we don't understand this, we may think we are doing things for one reason when we are doing it for a completely different reason. So the development of self-observation, self-awareness is the first step. Then we have to examine the kind of life and attitudes that we have. Where do they lead us? Because little by little we start seeing how these attitudes produce suffering in ourselves and suffering in others. Again, this requires certain level of intelligence. In general, we blame the environment, we blame the other person, we blame conditions. But if we look earnestly, honestly, we can start seeing that very rarely the problem is external. Of course, there are external conditions that are problematic, but it is always our response to them that generate a problem. So it's important to start learning from life, having this learning mind, and start seeing, not because we follow an external morality, but because we are seeing the effects of ambition, aggression, lying, anger. We begin to realize that it's better to live in another way. And then I would say the third step is to find ways in which we can start changing how we live. And these ways are, basically spiritual practices. We are attached to our impulses because that's the only thing we know about ourselves. We are not aware of those higher states of consciousness where there is peace and love and compassion and wisdom. So we need to start experiencing those and trying to follow those. And this all good spiritual practice is trying to help people to experience this aspect of ourselves. So I think that's, basically in a very broad summary, what we need.
Yeah, this I think are quite general principles in that you can find from many spiritual traditions. Is there some specific ways of working, for example, in these paths in theosophical society?
Yes, there are specific ways within a generality. Blavatsky and all theosophists say that there is nothing really new in any spiritual tradition because the principles are universal and they were always available to humanity, whether with the Egyptians or the Mayans or with the Hindu or Christian. There are principles that are universal, but the application or the focus changes. So in the theosophical tradition, there are practices that are more typically theosophical, let's call them, but you can find the principles in all traditions. Compassion is not a Buddhist thing. You have compassion in Christianity, in Hinduism, but the Buddha made emphasis on that, for example. And like that, many other things. I think in the something that I find quite unique in the theosophical tradition, it's the explanatory power that the teachings have. Because these teachings were given very recently, if you compare to the 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years of ancient teachings. These teachings were given only in the last 150 years. And they were given at a time where the human mind was beginning to become more and more complex. So today, it's not enough to tell people you have to love your neighbor. You have to explain to the mind why this is the case, to convince the mind that this is the right way of living, not just because God says it, but because there is a scientific reason, let's say. So I find that in Theosophy, there is a lot of explanation that supports the traditional universal principles in all traditions. And I think that's very helpful for many people today.
Yeah. Like in many good discussions that I have had in this podcast, also in this one, I realized that we have almost an hour of discussions and we are kind of, just scratched the surface, and now we could go on to this more deep discussions about these topics, but I think that we will have to leave it to another episode, hopefully. Where can people find more about these things that you were discussing? Can you give some pointers to people?
Yes. Well, for many of these kind of topics can be found on YouTube. I have a channel with my name Pablo Sender where you can see my many of my talks. Then the Theosophical Society in America also produces many talks that are on YouTube for free online. So if you look at these two channels, if you are interested in my talks, look at my channel, and then if for Theosophy in general, you can go to the Theosophical Society in America. And then there is a website of the Theosophical Society in America where there are many live online classes, including the ones that I am giving and the ones of many other people. The website is theosophical.org. So if you go there, you will see there is a tab that says programs and then online programs, and you can see whatever online classes are going on. And then in Finland, I'm sure you have a page, a website for the Theosophical Society in Finland. If you Google it, you will find it, and explore that page too to see if you live in Finland, to see what is available in the country.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any topics that you would like to bring up? Something that you like to talk about a little bit before we stop?
No, I think we had a great conversation with many interesting points that I not always talk about. We started with this interface between science and theosophy, and it was a
Yeah.
nice orientation. But basically, I think, even though all these subjects can be very interesting intellectually, as a philosophy, as a metaphysics, the idea of all of this is to provide us a different view of life, of ourselves, of the process of evolution, so that we can live in the current world without falling prey of all the fears and anxieties and anger that many people who want something better for humanity normally fall prey of. There is a different way of looking at life from the point of view of the eternal, of our eternal nature, from the point of view of evolution, that can bring peace and understanding to our lives, so that we can be constructive individuals in our families, groups, society. And I think that's a very valuable aspect to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with this. I think that it is very important to have multiple different perspectives on this life that we are living, because we very easily kind of focus on some things that are in our comfort zone, like you said about this one weakness of science being quite rigid in its methodologies. There's a good side on that, but also it can kind of grow too small, and not be enough room for example, some new things that could actually improve our understanding. So it has been very nice dialogue with you, Pablo, and I hope we will have another session on some of these topics in the future.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Tämä oli Mielen laboratorio. Jos olet kiinnostunut jungilaisesta coachauksesta, lyhyt psykoterapeuttisesta työskentelystä tai työnohjauksesta esimerkiksi meditaation liittyen, ota yhteyttä lähettämällä sähköpostia osoitteeseen ap@mielenlaboratorio.fi. Tutustu myös kirjoihini Mielen laboratorio sekä Mindfulness, mielen selkeys ja myötätunto, joka löytyy nyt myös äänikirjana. Ja jos pidit jaksosta, jaa se myös ystävillesi, jotta hekin pääsevät syventymään oman mielensä labyrintteihin.